911. What's your emergency?
She's not coming up, and she's under the water!
Ma'am, who's under the water?
Emma Carter entered the water like she had countless times before. Confident, calm, unaware she'd never surface the same. The audience cheered, cameras rolled, but beneath the surface, something had snapped. The Orca wasn't performing anymore. She was hunting. What happened in those final blood-chilling minutes? This is the horrifying last moments of Emma Carter.
Before the gasps, before the screams, before the water shifted from crystal blue to something far darker, there was only laughter and applause. Nobody sitting in those stands had the faintest idea. They were seconds away from watching a performance twist into something horrifying. The moment Emma Carter hit the water, the outcome was already sealed. The scariest part, not a single person suspected it. To the crowd, it looked like another perfect routine. The soaring jumps, the playful splashes, the smooth connection between her and the massive orca gliding at her side. It was flawless, almost cinematic. People clapped. A few pulled out their phones, thinking they were catching a magical moment on camera. But the magic was already gone. From the stands, it still looked like a dazzling duet. A woman and a predator moving as one. But if you looked closely, really closely, you'd see it. That wasn't joy in her eyes. It wasn't focus either. It was fear. Pure, sharp fear. Beneath the surface, muffled by the ripples, were the desperate peeps of her whistle and commands barked through sheer panic. This time, none of it worked. Lyra, the park's crown jewel, the 8,000-pound powerhouse that drew crowds from all over, wasn't following the script anymore. She was built for speed, precision, and dominance. And lately, she had been different. Restless, unpredictable, ignoring cues. For weeks, maybe months, the signs had been there, but they were brushed off as nothing more than a bad mood. Until that moment, the second Emma's body broke the surface, Lyra exploded forward like a torpedo and clamped down on her chest. No hesitation, no chance for help, just a violent blur that ended in a chilling stillness. It wasn't a freak accident. It was the breaking point of something that had been building for far too long. While everyone turned away, a tragedy unfolding in plain sight, disguised as entertainment, until the water turned red. Now we rewind the clock step by step, moment by moment, to uncover what really happened that day and the disturbing truth hidden in those final minutes. The Ocean Life Adventure Park. She had done this routine so many times that it was muscle memory by now. But today something felt off. The water didn't welcome her like it used to. Felt colder, heavier, as if holding something back. Something she couldn't quite put into words. Ocean Life Adventure Park, meanwhile, looked every bit like the postcard perfect Florida escape. The place pulsed with energy, packed with tourists soaking up the heat and thrill. Laughter floated through the air, mixing with the scent of saltwater, sunscreen, and deep-fried snacks. It was summer bottled up, loud, warm, and full of motion. Above, gulls coasted in lazy circles, their cries stitched into the background noise of chattering families and kids shrieking at sea creatures behind thick glass. Children zipped between exhibits, their hands sticky from melting ice cream. Parents followed close behind, clutching faded maps, trying to balance bathroom breaks with show schedules. Music played softly from hidden speakers, giving every walkway a soundtrack. People paused for selfies, giggled at the touch tanks, and gathered in droves near the massive Orca Stadium, the shining jewel of the park. For most, it was a perfect day. But beneath the surface, something wasn't right. Emma Carter stood still at the edge of the training pool, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze fixed on the water, more precisely on the shadow gliding through it. Lyra, the park's headliner, a 6-meter orca who had mesmerized audiences for years. Emma had worked with her long enough to understand the way she breathed, the way she moved, even the pauses between her routines. But now all of that felt foreign. Lyra wasn't swimming like she used to. Her movements lacked the grace that once came so naturally. Each turn was mechanical, tight, and repetitive, like she was caught in a loop she couldn't break out of. That powerful dorsal fin, once tall and strong, now sagged awkwardly to one side. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It looked like a weight she couldn't shake. What struck Emma the most, though, were her eyes. Lyra had always watched her with focus, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with playfulness. But today, her gaze didn't land on anything. It passed right through Emma, unfocused and distant. The fire that once lit up her eyes was gone. And standing there, Emma could feel it, too. Even her voice had changed. The soothing cadence of clicks and whistles that had become a familiar language between them had shifted into a disjointed pattern. Emma could hear it. These new sounds were not part of the usual behavior. They were sharp, jagged, filled with something that sounded eerily close to distress. Emma felt a tightness begin to build in her chest. These weren't random changes. She had seen the signs before. Trainers knew the difference. An Orca didn't just act out without reason. There was always a buildup, a quiet warning before the storm, and Lyra had been warning them for some time now. She leaned into her headset and calmly relayed the observation to the control room. She reported Lyra's continued circling, the vocalization irregularities, and requested it be documented. The voice on the other end belonged to David Wright, the park's operations manager. His tone, as always, was brisk and uninterested. He acknowledged her report, but told her to simply keep watching. It was a big weekend. He reminded her the media would be present. They needed the visuals. Everything had to appear flawless. Emma let out a slow breath, her jaw clenched. This wasn't the first time she had raised concerns. Over the past several weeks, she had logged everything. At first, the incidents were subtle. Delays in Lyra responding to cues, lingering near the bottom of the tank longer than usual, a growing reluctance to perform familiar routines. Then came the more obvious warnings. Sudden aggressive lunges toward junior trainers. Once Lyra slapped the water so close to a colleague's face that Emma had felt her heart freeze. The Orca's eyes were locked on the trainer, unblinking, intense. That had not been an accident. Emma was sure of it. Still, every report was met with the same response. Keep going. Stay the course. Don't stir up panic. The show must go on. Meanwhile, tourists pressed their faces against the glass, capturing selfies with the same Orca that was slowly unraveling behind that crystal-clear barrier. Emma's eyes remained fixed on Lyra. The Orca's posture was guarded. Her movements carried a defensive energy that was hard to ignore. Emma tightened her fists. She could feel it in her gut. Lyra was trying to say something. She was sounding alarms the only way she knew how. But no one was listening. The main show was already sold out for the next day. Thousands of guests were set to fill the stadium, waiting for the music, the lights, the wonder. But Emma knew the truth. Nature didn't always scream its warning. Sometimes it simmered, and when the heat became too much, it would boil over with no announcement at all. As the sun dipped below the skyline and the crowds began to fade, the park took on a quieter, more eerie presence. The loudspeakers went silent. Only the wind moved now, whistling gently through the empty seats of the stadium. Chlorine still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of salt from the artificial sea. Emma remained by the tank long after the others had gone. Lyra drifted near the deep end, her massive form gliding just beneath the surface like a silent ghost. A technician approached from the filtration room, wiping his forehead with a rag. He mentioned a problem with the system. The filters were cycling irregularly. He said they would patch it for now, but it needed a full overhaul. Emma turned sharply. She wanted to know why this was the first time she was hearing about it. The tech shrugged and explained that management didn't want delays. Everything had to be running smoothly for the weekend. Emma's expression hardened. She knew exactly how delicate Lyra's environment was. Any shift, water pressure, salinity, temperature could throw off the Orca's equilibrium. What might seem like a minor glitch to humans could feel like chaos underwater. She returned her gaze to the pool just as Lyra floated closer. The Orca paused. For a moment, the massive animal seemed to lock eyes with her. And in that fleeting second, Emma felt a jolt of unease. The eyes staring back at her were no longer familiar. Whatever warmth had once lived there had been replaced with something cold, something ancient, something she couldn't quite name. Then came the sound, a high-pitched cry that echoed through the empty stadium. It didn't resemble any of Lyra's usual vocalizations. It wasn't part of a routine. It sounded wild, unnatural, almost desperate. Emma's radio buzzed again. David's voice cut through the silence. He told her to prepare for a full sequence the following day. No changes. Everything had to go as planned. Her hand hovered over the mic. Every part of her told her to say no, to call it off. But then she thought of the pressure, the reputation of the park, the press, the staff, her role. It all rested on the illusion of control. She finally gave a quiet confirmation. She said she would be ready, though she knew in her heart that nothing felt ready at all. The lights dimmed. The maintenance crew wrapped up, but Emma stayed behind. She remained near the pool as Lyra drifted through the water, slow and shadow-like. For a final moment, they stared at one another, not as a trainer and performer, but as two beings caught in something far bigger than either of them. Tomorrow, the crowd would cheer, the music would rise, the illusion would return. But something had already broken beneath the surface, and Emma could feel it. She stood alone as the wind whispered through the seats and faint broken clicks echoed from the depths of the tank. The storm had not yet struck, but it was coming. And when it arrived, no one would be ready. When trust becomes terror. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something's just not right? Like you can't explain it, but every nerve in your body is on edge? That's exactly what Emma Carter felt that morning. She was in the locker room, same as always, putting on her wetsuit like it was just another day. The others were laughing, messing around, hyped up for the crowd outside. Typical pre-show energy, but Emma, she wasn't in that headspace. Now something felt wrong. Emma Carter's hands trembled as she struggled to fasten her headset, and it had nothing to do with stage fright. She wasn't nervous about the crowd or the performance. It was Lyra. Lyra wasn't just any Orca. She was her Orca, the one Emma had trained, bonded with, shared years of routines, signals, and silent understanding. But something had shifted. The connection felt different now, distant. The night before the incident, Emma had stayed behind long after the park had closed. She sat quietly near the tank, just watching. Lyra stared back, but her gaze had changed. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't even tired. It was empty, cold, and detached, as if something vital had shut off inside her. The vocalizations were strange, too. Not the usual playful clicks or melodic squeals. These were sharp, uneven, dissonant, almost like warning cries distorted into something foreign. Emma left the park that night with a pit in her stomach. She barely slept. Every part of her knew something was off. But by morning, the decision had already been made. The park was fully booked with thousands of guests expected to attend. Management had locked in the show. Tickets were sold, seats were filled, and expectations were sky-high. When the music began and the announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, she took her place by the pool's edge. She tried to steady her breathing and push the fear somewhere deep, but it lingered just beneath the surface. She stared at the still water, waiting. Then Lyra appeared. The crowd erupted into cheers. Children pointed with wide eyes and cameras captured every second. To them, it was magical, a graceful creature performing like clockwork. But Emma noticed the difference immediately. Lyra's movements were stiff, hesitant, almost robotic. She circled the tank in tight, repetitive laps, something she hadn't done in years. Not since those early days when she was first brought to the park, scared and unsure of her surroundings. A voice crackled through Emma's earpiece. "Emma, confirm sequence start." She hesitated for a breath. Her throat tightened, but she gave the response. Sequence confirmed. And then the show began. Lyra went through her routine. Jumps, twirls, tail slaps. It all looked polished to the guests who clapped and whistled with excitement. But Emma could tell something was breaking down. The rhythm was off. The spark was gone. Every trick felt forced, like Lyra was pushing through muscle memory instead of instinct or connection. She wasn't performing anymore. She was complying. Then came the grand finale, what they called the hurricane ride. Emma would step onto Lyra's rostrum and the Orca would spin rapidly before launching them both into the air. It was the most dangerous part of the show, one that demanded absolute trust between trainer and animal. They had done it dozens of times. But today, something inside Emma screamed to stop. She wanted to call it off to signal a reset. But the pressure was relentless. The show must go on. Everything ran on tight scripts and tighter expectations. No space for doubt, no room for fear. She looked at Lyra one last time, hoping to find reassurance in her eyes, but there was nothing there. Still she climbed on. The countdown started. 3, 2, 1. Lyra dove. The first spin was shaky. The second was worse. And then, without warning, Lyra veered sharply. Emma lost her balance. She was flung into the air, twisting as she hit the water with a painful smack. The cold swallowed her. Disoriented, she fumbled for her flotation device. But her hands were too slow. A dark shadow loomed beneath her. It was Lyra. And this time she wasn't rising to perform. She was coming with intent. Before Emma could react, Lyra surged upward. Her jaws closed around Emma's midsection with crushing force. The pressure was unimaginable. Bones cracked beneath the weight. Pain shot through her body like lightning. Emma tried to scream, but there was only water rushing into her mouth. Above the surface, the mood shifted instantly. Gasps turned to shrieks. Screams echoed through the stands. Parents grabbed their children. Security tried to push through the chaos. Trainers were tossing fish, waving flags, issuing underwater distress signals. Nothing worked. Lyra didn't react. Whatever thread of control once existed had snapped. She thrashed Emma with terrifying force, whipping her body from side to side in the same ruthless motion wild orcas used to rip seals apart. The water turned a deep, swirling red, and from the stands, thousands sat frozen, helpless, forced to witness the nightmare unfold. Emergency alarms blared. Every safety measure was activated. Trainers screamed through their mics, desperate to stop the attack. Still, Lyra dove with Emma's body in her grip, dragging her to the bottom of the tank. Moments later, she surfaced again, only to grab her once more. It continued for 7 agonizing minutes. Some people cried, others couldn't look away. The entire stadium sat in stunned collective paralysis. And then came the most haunting moment of all. Lyra glided toward the underwater viewing window and pressed Emma's limp, bloodied body against the glass. Thousands of faces stared in disbelief. Children, parents, tourists. No one had ever been that close to death. Nothing could prepare them for that image. No filter could soften what they saw. No one would ever forget. This wasn't a routine gone wrong. It was something raw and terrifying. A glimpse of the wild that had never been tamed. Security worked to evacuate the crowd. Trainers scrambled for control, but Lyra kept circling slow and deliberate, guarding what was left, like it meant something to her, daring anyone to intervene. Emma's body floated silently in the water. Whatever bond they had built was broken. It had vanished the moment instinct took over. Because behind the lights, behind the music, beneath all the branding and costumes, Lyra had never truly been a performer. She was a predator, and that day she reminded the world. Now, what do you think was happening in those final moments? We would like to hear your thoughts as we continue piecing together the truth behind Emma Carter's final performance when the applause turned to silence. There was a change in the air, faint yet impossible to miss. It carried the same heavy silence that settles just before a storm. The kind everyone feels deep in their bones, but pretends not to notice. That was the mood at Ocean Life Adventure Park right before everything spiraled. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the trainers, didn't even blink at the flashing emergency lights or the food tossed toward her. It was as if she had snapped out of the world they had shaped her in and dropped straight into the one nature intended. Silent, lethal, untamed. Miguel, one of the assistant trainers, scrambled with the emergency nets, hands trembling like leaves in a storm. The net system was supposed to kick in immediately to isolate a dangerous animal in seconds, but it jammed halfway. The cords got tangled on the rails and refused to budge. His voice cracked over the radio as he screamed that the system was down, panic choking every word. Lisa Monroe, the the senior trainer stationed by the control booth, initiated the acoustic recall, a sequence of high-pitched frequencies that normally lured Orcus into a separate tank for medical checks. But Lyra didn't move, didn't even flick her tail. All that training, all those years of conditioning gone. What was left was something raw, primal, and entirely indifferent to human authority. From the edge of the tank, the other trainers could only watch in paralyzed horror as Lyra pulled Emma under again, held her there, then let her float up lifeless before yanking her back down with terrifying precision. Every attempt to stop it failed. Long poles meant to create distance were useless. Lyra outmaneuvered them every time. Her tail alone created waves that crashed against the tank walls like thunder. 7 minutes felt like 7 lifetimes. Eventually, someone untangled the net enough to create a narrow barrier. It was just enough to separate Lyra from Emma just for a moment. Paramedics rushed in and pulled her body from the water. Her wetsuit was shredded, her torso punctured and fractured in too many places to count. There was no pulse. The silence that followed was crushing except for the frantic sound of CPR compressions and oxygen masks and defibrillators clicking on. But nothing worked. At exactly 11:47 that morning, Emma Carter was pronounced dead. The cause, massive trauma and drowning. Meanwhile, Lyra moved along the edges of the pool as if nothing at all had taken place. Her massive body glided effortlessly through the water, indifferent to the chaos she had unleashed only moments earlier. The detachment was chilling, almost unnatural, and in that moment it became impossible to pretend any longer. What had been quietly ignored for months now stood glaringly in the open. The warnings had been there all along. Subtle changes in her temperament. Mechanical problems kept piling up without resolution. Staff who had begun whispering their unease in back corridors. And yet no one stepped forward. Not when the stands were packed with cheering crowds and ticket sales broke records. Emma's death was not some unpredictable twist of fate. It was a tragedy that had been building slowly and steadily, like a storm gathering on the horizon, visible to anyone willing to look closely. That afternoon, news of what happened spread with the speed of a spark in dry grass. Helicopters hovered over the park while reporters gathered outside the gates, shouting questions that no one dared to answer. Families streamed out, many in tears, children clinging to their parents with wide-eyed confusion, clutching plush dolphins that now seemed like strange hollow souvenirs. Within hours, the internet was drowning in the footage. Grainy clips captured the blood, the screaming, the chaos that tore through what was supposed to be a carefully choreographed performance. Headlines flared across every major outlet. Trainer killed during Orca show. Park under fire. Ocean life's illusion shattered. Inside the staff room, the air was thick and suffocating. Emma's fellow trainers sat in silence, dripping wet, their faces blank with shock, unable to wrap their minds around what had just unfolded in front of them. Management gathered in hushed circles near the windows, speaking in low, urgent tones. Lawyers murmured strategy. Public relations officers tapped furiously at their keyboards, crafting statements with every word polished to avoid even a sliver of responsibility. But no amount of corporate wording could erase the reality of what had happened. The investigation that followed only confirmed what those closest to Lyra already suspected. Her aggression had not emerged from nowhere. It had been building day by day. Trainers had documented her restless pacing, her strange vocalizations in the dead of night, her refusal to follow commands, and even incidents that put junior staff at risk. The leadership knew. They just refused to act. The findings were worse than anyone expected. Maintenance logs revealed the park's water filtration system had failed the night before the incident, and this was not the first time. Repairs were delayed repeatedly because the cost was considered too high. Emma herself had filed multiple reports warning of serious safety hazards, but those reports had been quietly set aside, buried beneath the park's hunger for profit and its own pride. The backlash came swiftly. Protesters stood outside the gates holding signs that called for justice. Former employees stepped forward with stories of cover-ups, ignored warnings, and near disasters that had been brushed aside. Lawsuits began to pile up. Sponsors withdrew their funding. Attendance plummeted until the board had no choice but to make the final call. 6 months later, Ocean Life Adventure Park locked its gates for the last time. Early in 2023, it was officially gone. As for Lyra, she was relocated to a heavily secured marine facility. No more trainers in her tank. No more rehearsed shows under blinding lights. Her life became one of quiet confinement, far from the crowds that once applauded her every move. Emma's family was left with a wound no amount of compensation could heal. There was no apology deep enough, no press statement careful enough, and no policy change swift enough to bring her back. But her story refused to fade. It became a spark that ignited a worldwide debate about captivity, about humanity's obsession with controlling the wild, and about the cost of silencing nature for the sake of entertainment. The smiles, the photo opportunities, the carefully manufactured magic, all of it was stripped away. What remained was the truth, raw and unflinching, the echo she left behind. The stadium sat in complete stillness. No cheers, no clapping, no booming music shaking the air, just silence. The stands, once packed with families and school groups, were nothing but rows of cold, empty seats now. The giant banners with smiling trainers and leaping orcas had been pulled down, and the stage, the same one that used to light up with wonder, felt more like a memorial than an attraction. Down by the edge of the tank, right where Emma Carter once stood, a small tribute had formed. A few candles fought against the breeze. White lilies leaned against the glass. Handwritten notes were taped to the acrylic like they were trying to reach someone who could no longer hear. That was the spot where Emma would show visitors how patience and trust could bring people and wild creatures closer together. But now that idea felt fragile, wounded. Some of her old coworkers stood nearby. Their faces said everything. Grief, guilt, and the question nobody wanted to answer out loud. Could this have been stopped? The truth is, probably. The warning signs were there. Subtle at first, but building. They felt it. They just kept going like nothing was wrong. And the cost, it can't be undone. Her younger sister, Rachel, was among them. Eyes red but her expression steady. She stepped forward and placed a photo at the center of the memorial. Emma was in it, smiling wide with the sun on her hair, reaching toward Lyra, the orca, like they spoke the same language. But the picture doesn't tell the whole story anymore. Behind the glass, the water lay still, almost too still, as if it knew something was missing. Lyra was no longer there. She had been shipped to a distant marine research facility, far away from the noise, the flashing cameras, and the daily shows. To some people, she was nothing more than a dangerous animal who had turned on her trainer. To others, she was a captive who had finally reached the point where she could not take it anymore. After Emma's death, the reaction was swift and loud. Protesters filled the sidewalks outside the park. Petitions flooded the internet. Newspapers ran bold headlines. Former trainers stepped forward speaking about what they had seen behind the scenes. Scientists, animal advocates, and whistleblowers all raised their voices. The signs had been there all along, yet no one had wanted to see them. One truth cut through all the arguments and noise. Trust alone cannot undo instinct. Emma's death was no longer just a personal loss. It became a warning, a reflection of an industry built on turning nature into entertainment, on blurring the line between awe and exploitation. As the evening light faded, the candles at her memorial still flickered against the growing dark. A small plaque sat at the base of the flowers, its inscription quietly defiant. In memory of Emma Carter, who loved the ocean, but knew even love has limits. Beyond the park's gates, the waves rolled on as they always had. But something felt different. This time, people seemed to be listening. For years, we convinced ourselves that instinct could be trained out of a predator. That with enough fish and enough rehearsals, the wild could be turned into a performance. But the moment Emma's blood touched the water, that illusion shattered. She was not the first. And if orcas like Lyra remain in concrete tanks, she will not be the last. So the question now lingers. Should orca shows disappear forever? Or is there truly a way to keep this bond alive without breaking what is wild? Thanks for watching. See you in the next.